A bride vanished mysteriously right after her wedding ceremony, leaving behind her wedding dress and confused guests. Her family searched desperately, but found no trace of where she could have gone. But 6 days later, her beloved horse returns to the family farm alone, and what they discover attached to the saddle sends chills down everyone's spine and reveals a truth no one could have imagined. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you how all of this happened. Do you, Hannah Miller, take Jack Thompson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? Hannah looked into Jack's eyes, her heart racing. The church was filled with the scent of white roses and baby's breath. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews where their friends and family sat watching. "I do," Hannah said, her voice clear and steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The ceremony continued beautifully in the small church of Willow Creek, New York. When they kissed as husband and wife, everyone cheered. Hannah's mother Linda dabbed tears from her eyes, and her father Richard stood tall and proud. Later that evening, the reception at the Miller family farm was in full swing. Fairy lights twinkled in the old oak trees. Round tables covered in white tablecloths dotted the lawn. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the warm summer air. "May I have everyone's attention?" Richard Miller said, tapping his glass with a spoon. The crowd quieted. 24 years ago, my wife and I were blessed with our beautiful daughter Hannah. Today, we couldn't be prouder to welcome Jack into our family. Richard's speech brought tears to many eyes. Hannah squeezed Jack's hand under the table. "I love you," Jack whispered. "I love you too," Hannah replied, though something flickered behind her eyes. As the night progressed, the band played slow songs and fast ones. Hannah danced with her father, then with Jack, then with her best friend Olivia. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Olivia said, hugging her tightly. At 9:30, Hannah looked at her watch. "I need to freshen up," she told Jack. "Save me some cake." "Don't be too long," he said, kissing her cheek. "We have that dance coming up." Hannah smiled and walked toward the farmhouse. Inside, she closed the bathroom door and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, beautiful in her white gown, but with eyes full of doubt. 30 minutes passed. Linda Miller noticed her daughter's absence and went to check on her. "Hannah?" she called, knocking on the bathroom door. When there was no answer, she slowly pushed it open. The bathroom was empty. On the counter lay Hannah's wedding dress, neatly folded. Her wedding ring sat carefully on top. "Richard!" Linda screamed, her voice cutting through the party noise outside. Within minutes, the joyful celebration turned to chaos. Jack rushed into the house, his face pale. "What do you mean she's gone?" he asked, his voice breaking. "We're supposed to leave for Greece next week. We've been planning it for months." Sheriff Tom Wilson arrived with 2 deputies. Tall and weathered, with salt and pepper hair, he moved with calm authority. "When did you last see her?" he asked Jack. "About 45 minutes ago. She said she was going to freshen up." Jack ran his hands through his hair. "I don't understand. Everything was perfect." The sheriff turned to the other guests. "Did anyone see Hannah leave?" No one had. Search parties formed to check the property. Deputies interviewed guests, while Sheriff Wilson examined the bathroom. No signs of struggle, he noted in his small notebook. Dress and ring left deliberately. Hannah's phone was found in her purse at the bridal table, untouched. As days passed, suspicion inevitably turned to Jack. Sheriff Wilson questioned him for hours. "I would never hurt Hannah," Jack insisted, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. "I love her. Ask anyone. I was at the reception the whole time she disappeared." Dozens of guests confirmed his alibi. Olivia Parker, Hannah's best friend since childhood, sat with Sheriff Wilson at the Willow Creek Diner 5 days after the disappearance. "She seemed nervous these past few weeks," Olivia admitted. "I thought it was just wedding jitters." "Did she say anything specific that worried you?" Olivia hesitated. She mentioned having strange dreams, said she felt like someone was trying to tell her something. I told her it was just stress. Meanwhile, Hannah's parents barely slept, coordinating with volunteers who searched the surrounding woods and fields. Every time the phone rang, Linda jumped, hoping for news about her daughter. On the morning of the 6th day, Richard Miller went to check on Cinnamon, Hannah's beloved chestnut mare. He opened the stable door and stopped cold. The stall was empty. Richard Miller ran back to the farmhouse, his heart pounding. He burst through the kitchen door where Linda sat at the table, staring at Hannah's wedding photo. "Cinnamon is gone," Richard announced, his voice shaking. Linda jumped to her feet. "Hannah's horse? Are you sure?" "The stall is empty. The gate was closed but not locked." Richard grabbed the phone. "I'm calling Sheriff Wilson." Within 30 minutes, Sheriff Wilson arrived at the Miller farm. He inspected the empty stall, running his hand along the wooden door. "When did you last see the horse?" he asked. "Last night around 9 o'clock when I fed her," Richard answered. "This morning she was gone." Sheriff Wilson wrote in his notebook, "This could be good news. If Hannah took her horse, she left willingly." "But why would she leave without telling us?" Linda asked, tears in her eyes. "That's what we need to find out," the sheriff replied. Jack arrived moments later, having heard the news. His face was unshaven, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "If she took Cinnamon, she can't have gone far," Jack said. "Hannah wouldn't leave that horse outside overnight." They organized search parties to check all the trails Hannah usually rode. Jack and Richard took the north path toward Bear Creek. Sheriff Wilson and his deputy headed east toward the old mining road. Other volunteers searched the western trails. Hours passed with no sign of Hannah or Cinnamon. As the sun began to set, hope started to fade. "We should head back," Sheriff Wilson told his deputy. "It'll be dark soon." Back at the Miller farm, Linda had prepared coffee and sandwiches for the returning search parties. Everyone gathered in the kitchen, tired and disappointed. "We'll start again tomorrow at first light," Sheriff Wilson promised. Just then, they heard the sound of hooves on the gravel driveway. "Listen!" Jack shouted, rushing to the window. "That's Cinnamon!" They all ran outside to see Hannah's chestnut mare trotting up the driveway. The horse was alone, the stirrups were empty, and the reins dragged on the ground. "Hannah!" Linda cried out, looking past the horse for any sign of her daughter. Richard approached Cinnamon slowly, speaking in a gentle voice. "Easy, girl, easy." He caught the reins and stroked the horse's neck. "Where's Hannah, girl? Where is she?" That's when Sheriff Wilson noticed something unusual tied to the saddle, a weathered leather satchel. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. Richard untied the leather bag. "I've never seen this before. It's not Hannah's." They brought Cinnamon to the stable, gave her water, and checked her for injuries. The horse seemed tired but unhurt. Inside the house, Sheriff Wilson carefully opened the leather satchel on the kitchen table. Inside, he found 3 items: Hannah's diary, several Polaroid photographs of a cabin in the woods, and a strange map drawn on yellowed paper. "That's Hannah's handwriting," Linda said, pointing to the diary. Sheriff Wilson opened the diary and turned to the most recent entries. His expression grew more concerned as he read. "What is it?" Jack asked. "What does it say?" "Hannah's been having dreams about someone named Eleanor," the sheriff explained. "A woman who lived in the 1800s. According to these entries, this Eleanor also ran away from her wedding." "That's crazy," Jack said. "Hannah never mentioned any Eleanor to me." Sheriff Wilson turned to the final entry, dated the day before the wedding. He read it aloud. "Eleanor is calling me to the cabin. I need to understand what happened to her. I'll come back when I know the truth." Richard examined the map. "These markings, this shows a path to Blackwater Lake. It's about 25 miles from here. And these photos," Linda said, holding up the Polaroids. "This must be the cabin Hannah mentioned." Sheriff Wilson studied the map. "The terrain looks difficult. Lots of forest, some rocky areas. We'll need proper equipment to reach this place." "I'm going with you," Jack insisted. "Me too," Richard added. "We'll leave at first light," Sheriff Wilson decided. "I'll bring 2 deputies. We'll need to move quickly, but carefully." As the others discussed preparations for the journey, Linda sat quietly, looking through Hannah's diary. The entries described increasingly vivid dreams about Eleanor Green, a young woman from the past who seemed desperate to communicate something important. "Be safe, Hannah," Linda whispered, touching the pages her daughter had written. "Please be safe." The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Sheriff Wilson's search team gathered at the Miller farm. Jack, Richard, and 2 deputies stood by the sheriff's truck, checking their gear one last time. "Everyone got water and trail mix?" Sheriff Wilson asked, his voice gruff from lack of sleep. "This will be a long hike." Jack nodded, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "Let's find her." The 5 men climbed into 2 vehicles and drove to the edge of the forest where the trail began. The old map from the leather satchel was spread across the hood of the sheriff's truck. "We follow this creek for about 3 miles, Sheriff Wilson pointed, "then head east up this ridge. The cabin should be in this clearing near Blackwater Lake." The men set off in single file. Sheriff Wilson led the way, with Jack close behind, then Richard and the 2 deputies. The morning air was cool and damp as they moved through the dense forest. Birds called overhead, and occasionally they startled a deer or rabbit from the underbrush. "Hannah loves these woods," Richard said quietly to Jack. "She's been riding through here since she was 12. "I know," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the trees, "but she's never mentioned this cabin before." After 3 hours of hiking, the path became steeper and rockier. They helped each other over fallen logs and across a small stream. The men were tired, but no one complained. "We're getting close," Sheriff Wilson announced as they reached the top of a ridge. "The map shows the cabin just beyond those tall pines." They moved forward more cautiously now. Jack's heart was racing, both from the climb and from anxiety about what they might find. Then suddenly, they saw it, a small wooden cabin nestled among the trees. It looked old and weathered, with a sagging roof and windows clouded with dust. It matched the Polaroid photos exactly. "Hannah," Sheriff Wilson called out. "Hannah Miller, this is Sheriff Wilson." Silence answered him. "Let's approach carefully," the sheriff instructed. "Deputies, circle around back. Richard and Jack, stay with me." The 3 men walked slowly toward the front door. Sheriff Wilson drew his gun, keeping it pointed downward. "Hannah," he called again. "Are you in there?" Still no answer. The sheriff reached the door and tested the handle. It turned easily. He pushed the door open, wincing at the loud creak of rusty hinges. "Hannah?" Jack called, his voice breaking with emotion. The inside of the cabin was dim, with dust particles dancing in the few beams of sunlight that penetrated the dirty windows. The room was filled with old furniture, a table covered in papers, bookshelves sagging with leather-bound volumes, and a stone fireplace with cold ashes. Then they heard it, a soft sound from the corner of the room. "There!" Richard pointed to a small cot against the far wall. Hannah lay curled up on the cot, asleep. Her clothes were dirty and her hair was tangled, but she appeared unharmed. Jack rushed to her side. "Hannah! Hannah! Wake up!" Hannah's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked confused, then almost disappointed to see them. "Jack? Dad? What are you doing here?" she asked, sitting up slowly. "What are we doing here?" Richard exclaimed. "We've been searching for you for almost a week. You disappeared from your own wedding." Sheriff Wilson holstered his gun and approached. "Hannah, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Hannah shook her head. "No, I'm fine. Just tired." She looked around the cabin. "I've been studying these papers. There's so much history here." Jack knelt beside the cot. "Hannah, why did you leave? Why didn't you tell anyone where you were going?" Hannah's eyes seemed to focus on something distant. "I had to come. Eleanor showed me the way." "Eleanor?" Sheriff Wilson asked. "The woman from your diary?" Hannah nodded. "She's been trying to tell me something important. Something about this place and about the past." She gestured to the stacks of papers. "This cabin belonged to Thomas Walker, a historian who died 15 years ago. He documented everything about Eleanor Green's disappearance in 1879. Sheriff Wilson began examining the papers on the table. "And you found this place because of dreams?" "They weren't just dreams," Hannah insisted. "They were too real, too specific. Eleanor showed me exactly how to get here." Jack looked hurt and confused. "But why run away on our wedding day? Why not tell me about this?" Hannah looked at Jack with sad eyes. "Because it's connected to you too, Jack. To your family. I just didn't understand how until I got here." Back at the sheriff's office in Willow Creek, Hannah sat on a wooden chair with a blanket around her shoulders. Her parents, Jack and Sheriff Wilson, gathered around her, their faces showing concern and confusion. "I know you all think I've lost my mind," Hannah said, looking at each of them. "But please, just listen to my story." Linda reached out and held her daughter's hand. "We're listening, honey." Hannah took a deep breath. "It started about 3 months ago. I had a dream about a woman named Eleanor Green. She was wearing an old-fashioned wedding dress, standing at the edge of the forest, waving for me to follow her." "Just a random dream," Jack said. "Everyone has weird dreams." "No," Hannah shook her head. "It wasn't random. The same dream came back night after night. Eleanor would say the same thing each time. Find the truth before you make the same mistake." Richard frowned. "What mistake?" "That's what I needed to find out," Hannah explained. "At first I tried to ignore the dreams. I thought they were just wedding stress, but they became more detailed, more real." Sheriff Wilson leaned forward in his chair. "So on your wedding day, you decided to follow these dream instructions?" Hannah nodded. "After the ceremony, during the reception, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to find the cabin from my dreams. It was like Eleanor was pulling me there, so I changed clothes, took cinnamon, and followed the path that I'd seen so many times in my sleep." "But why not tell anyone?" Jack asked, his voice breaking. "Why not tell me?" Hannah looked at him with sad eyes. "Would you have believed me? Would you have understood that I needed to follow a ghost from my dreams?" Jack didn't answer. "I found the cabin exactly where Eleanor had shown me," Hannah continued. "Inside were all these journals and papers belonging to Thomas Walker. He was a historian who spent years researching Eleanor Green's story." Sheriff Wilson pulled out his notebook. "And who was Eleanor Green?" "She lived here in 1879, Hannah explained. "She was supposed to marry William Preston, a rich businessman who owned half the land around here, but on her wedding day, she discovered something terrible." "What did she discover?" Linda asked. "Preston was stealing land from the native people," Hannah said. "He forged documents and bribed officials to take land that wasn't his. Eleanor found out just before her wedding. She couldn't marry him knowing what he'd done, so she ran away to warn the tribal leaders." Richard scratched his head. "So this woman from over 100 years ago somehow connected with you through dreams." "I know how it sounds," Hannah admitted. "But there's more. Eleanor disappeared after she fled her wedding. Most people thought she died in the forest, but Thomas Walker's research suggests she was actually killed by Preston's men while trying to bring evidence to the tribal leaders." Sheriff Wilson's eyebrows rose. "And you found evidence of this?" "Yes," Hannah nodded eagerly. "In the cabin's cellar, there's a hidden compartment under the floorboards. I found Eleanor's wedding ring and original documents proving Preston's land theft." "And why didn't you come back after finding all this?" Jack asked. "I was going to," Hannah explained, "but a huge storm hit that night. The path was washed out. I was trapped at the cabin for days. I survived on canned food from the pantry and kept reading through Walker's research." Sheriff Wilson was writing everything down. "This is quite a story, Hannah, but I'm still not clear on why Eleanor's story connected to you so strongly." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Jack. "Because history is repeating itself. Thomas Walker's notes showed that the land Preston stole is the same land where Thompson Development is planning to build their new resort." Jack's face turned pale. "My family's company?" "Yes," Hannah said softly. "The resort your father is planning to build is on land that still legally belongs to the descendants of those native tribes. Walker's maps show it includes sacred sites that were never legally sold." The room fell silent. Sheriff Wilson closed his notebook and stood up. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to look into these claims. Jack, does your father keep company records at the office in town?" Jack nodded, his face troubled. "Yes, everything should be there." "Then I believe," Sheriff Wilson said, "we have some investigating to do." Hannah led Sheriff Wilson, Jack, and her father down the narrow wooden stairs into the cabin's cellar. The air was damp and musty, filled with the smell of old paper and earth. Their flashlights cast long shadows across the dirt floor. "It's right over here," Hannah said, walking to the far corner of the cellar. She knelt down and ran her hand along the floor until she found a small notch in one of the boards. "Help me lift this." Richard and Sheriff Wilson bent down to help, and together they pulled up a section of the wooden floor. Underneath was a small metal box, tarnished with age. "This is what Eleanor wanted me to find," Hannah said, carefully lifting the box. Sheriff Wilson shined his flashlight on it. "Looks like it's been here for decades." Hannah opened the box, revealing a tarnished silver ring and several yellowed documents folded inside. This was Eleanor's wedding ring, and these papers prove what Preston did. Jack took one of the documents and unfolded it carefully. His hands trembled as he read. "This is a deed transfer with forged signatures, and here's a letter mentioning payments to government officials. Preston stole this land by lying and cheating," Hannah explained. "Eleanor found these papers in his office the morning of their wedding. She took them and ran." Sheriff Wilson examined the documents. "These are historically significant, but I'm more interested in how they connect to the present." Hannah pulled out a more recent map from the box. Thomas Walker marked the stolen land on this map. Look at the area circled in red. Jack's face paled as he looked at the map. "That's exactly where my father is planning to build Blackwater Resort." "Yes," Hannah said. "And according to Walker's notes, that land includes sacred burial grounds that were never legally sold." Richard shook his head in disbelief. How did no one discover this before now? "Walker died before he could publish his findings," Hannah explained. "And the cabin is so remote, no one came looking." Sheriff Wilson carefully gathered the documents. "I was planning to leave after bringing you back, but I think I need to stay and check out this cellar thoroughly. I was trapped here for days because of the storm," Hannah continued. "I had time to read everything Walker collected. Eleanor tried to bring these documents to tribal leaders, but Preston's men caught her in the forest. Walker believed they killed her and hid her body." Jack sat down on a wooden crate, his face troubled. "My father always said this land deal was completely legal. All the permits and surveys were approved." "Maybe he doesn't know," Hannah suggested gently. "Or maybe he does," Sheriff Wilson said. "Either way, we need to investigate." The sheriff's radio crackled with static, then a voice came through. "Sheriff, this is Deputy Collins. Do you copy?" "I copy, Collins. Go ahead." "Sir, Mr. Thompson is at the station demanding to know why you took his son to look for Hannah without informing him." Jack sighed. "That's my father." Sheriff Wilson spoke into the radio. "Tell Mr. Thompson I'll meet with him when I return to town." He turned to the others. "I need to document everything here properly. This is evidence now." "Evidence of what?" Jack asked. "A 100-year-old crime?" "Possibly," Sheriff Wilson replied, "but also of a current land dispute that could affect your father's development project." Hannah placed her hand on Jack's arm. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt your family, but Eleanor kept showing me these papers in my dreams. She wanted justice." Jack looked at Hannah with confusion and hurt in his eyes. "So you ran away from our wedding because of dreams about a woman who died over 100 years ago?" "I know how it sounds," Hannah said quietly, "but I felt her desperation. She needed someone to find the truth. And when I saw the connection to your family's company, I understood why it had to be me." Sheriff Wilson carefully packed the documents back into the metal box. "We need to bring this box back to town, and I think we all need to have a long talk with Mr. Thompson." Sheriff Wilson parked his patrol car outside the Thompson Development offices in downtown Willow Creek. The modern glass building stood out among the older brick structures on Main Street. "Are you sure you want to be here for this, Jack?" Sheriff Wilson asked. Jack nodded, his face tense. "I need to know the truth." Inside, William Thompson was waiting in the lobby. Tall and imposing with silver hair, he rushed toward them as they entered. "Jack, what is going on? I've been calling you for hours." His eyes narrowed when he saw Hannah. "So she's back. I assume this ridiculous search is over now." "Mr. Thompson," Sheriff Wilson said formally, "I need to speak with you about your company's Blackwater Resort project." William frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I have a warrant to search your office files related to that development." Sheriff Wilson handed William the paper. William's face flushed red. "This is outrageous. Our permits are in order." Then you won't mind if we take a look, Sheriff Wilson replied calmly. William turned to Jack. What have you done? Is this because of her? He pointed at Hannah. Dad, please, Jack said quietly. Let's just cooperate. Sheriff Wilson and his deputy followed William to his office on the top floor. Jack and Hannah waited in the conference room next door. I'm sorry about this, Hannah said softly. Jack stared out the window. You really believe my father is doing something illegal? I don't know, Hannah answered honestly. But those documents in the cabin show that the land has a complicated history. After almost an hour, Sheriff Wilson returned holding a folder. His face was serious. I need you to come in here, Jack. In William's office, papers were spread across the large desk. William sat in his chair, arms crossed and face angry. Show him, William snapped at the sheriff. Sheriff Wilson opened the folder. These are permits for the Blackwater Resort project. They appear to have been approved through proper channels. But when I called to verify them, I discovered something concerning. What? Jack asked. The environmental review was rushed through, and the tribal consultation requirement was bypassed entirely. The signature of tribal council approval was forged. Jack looked at his father in shock. Dad! William slammed his hand on the desk. The land belongs to us. Those permits would have taken years otherwise. The land does not belong to you, Sheriff Wilson said firmly. According to the documents we found in Walker's cabin, that property was never legally transferred from the original tribal owners. Those documents are over 100 years old, William shouted. The law doesn't expire, Sheriff Wilson replied, and forging modern tribal council signatures is a serious crime. Jack's face had gone pale. Did you know about this, Dad? Did you know the land wasn't legally ours? William hesitated, then his shoulders slumped. There were rumors, old stories about disputed boundaries, but our lawyers said it wouldn't matter after all this time. Hannah stepped forward. It matters to the descendants of those people. That land includes sacred burial sites. This project means everything to the company, William said, his voice suddenly tired. We've invested millions already. Sheriff Wilson gathered the papers. I'm taking these as evidence. Mr. Thompson, I strongly suggest you call your lawyer. When they left the office, Jack was silent. In the elevator, Hannah touched his arm gently. Are you okay? No, Jack said simply. My whole life, my father taught me about the Thompson legacy, about doing things the right way. And now. In the lobby, reporters had already gathered, alerted by someone about the sheriff's visit to Thompson Development. Jack, William called from behind them. Don't say anything to them. This is just a misunderstanding. Jack turned to his father, his eyes pained. Is it? Or is our entire family business built on lies? The elevator doors closed between them, leaving William alone with the weight of secrets finally exposed. The town hall of Willow Creek was packed with people. Every wooden bench was filled, and many stood along the walls. Sheriff Wilson had called this community meeting to address the growing rumors about Thompson Development and the missing bride who had uncovered a century-old secret. Hannah sat in the front row beside her parents. Jack sat across the aisle with his mother and sister. William Thompson arrived last, walking stiffly to a seat near the back. Sheriff Wilson stood at the podium. Thank you all for coming. As many of you know, we've uncovered some concerning information about the land where Blackwater Resort is being built. He held up the old documents from the cabin. These papers show that in 1879, William Preston illegally obtained land from the native tribes through forged deeds and bribery. Murmurs spread through the crowd. More troubling, the sheriff continued, is evidence that Thompson Development has used similar tactics to push through permits for their new resort on that same disputed land. William Thompson stood up. This is ridiculous. Those old papers prove nothing about modern property rights. From the side door, 3 people entered the hall. An older man with long gray hair led 2 younger people wearing formal tribal attire. These representatives from the River Valley tribe have brought their own records, Sheriff Wilson explained. Chief Samuel Blackfeather, please come forward. The older man approached the podium. Our tribe has maintained records of our lands for generations. The area known as Blackwater Lake includes sacred burial grounds of our ancestors. We have never surrendered this land legally." He held up a leather-bound document. "This is our copy of the original boundary treaty. It clearly shows the disputed area was never part of any legal sale." Jack suddenly stood up. "I need to say something." All eyes turned to him as he walked to the front of the room. "Until a week ago, I believed our company operated with complete integrity. I was wrong." Jack's voice shook slightly. "I've reviewed the documents found by Hannah and the falsified permits in my father's office. There's no doubt that Thompson Development knowingly tried to build on land that isn't ours." William Thompson's face reddened. "Jack, what are you doing?" "The right thing, Dad," Jack replied. "Something I should have done sooner." Jack turned to face the tribal representatives. "On behalf of Thompson Development, I apologize for the pain my family's actions have caused. I promise to work with you to make this right." William stormed to the front. "You're throwing away generations of family work because of your confused bride," he shouted, pointing at Hannah. The room fell silent. Hannah looked at Jack, their eyes meeting across the distance. Jack faced his father. "No, Dad, I'm finally seeing clearly. Our family built its wealth by following in Preston's footsteps, taking what wasn't ours and calling it progress." William stormed out of the hall, brushing past Sheriff Wilson. After the meeting, Hannah and Jack sat on a bench outside as the sun set over Willow Creek. This was their first moment alone since her return. "You didn't have to do that," Hannah said quietly. "Stand up to your father in front of everyone." Jack looked at his hands. "Yes, I did. It was the right thing to do." "Why didn't you ever listen when I tried to talk about the company before?" Hannah asked. "I mentioned concerns about some of the projects, but you always defended your father." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I think I was afraid to see the truth. It was easier to believe everything was fine." "That's why I couldn't tell you about Eleanor," Hannah said. "Every time I tried to question anything about your family, you shut down." "I understand now," Jack said. "Eleanor showed you what I refused to see." Hannah watched the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. "I'm sorry I ran away instead of talking to you. That wasn't fair." "And I'm sorry I never really listened," Jack replied. Do you think we can start over?" Hannah turned to look at him, her expression complicated. "I don't know, Jack. I think we both need time to figure out who we are outside of what everyone expected us to be." Summer turned to fall in Willow Creek. The maple trees along Main Street changed from green to bright orange and red. Hannah moved her things into a small apartment above the Willow Creek bookstore. The space was tiny but cozy, with wooden floors and windows that looked out over the town square. On her first night there, Hannah sat cross-legged on her new bed, writing in a fresh diary. She had left her old one with Sheriff Wilson as evidence. This new beginning felt both scary and exciting. The next morning, Hannah walked to the community college where she had enrolled in local history classes. Professor Martinez welcomed her warmly. "We're all talking about your discovery at the cabin," he said. "Would you consider sharing your experience with the class?" Hannah smiled shyly. "I'd like that." After class, Hannah met with Sarah Whitefeather, one of the tribal representatives she had seen at the town meeting. "My grandfather would like to speak with you," Sarah said. "He says you have done what many could not. You listened to the spirits of the past." Hannah spent many afternoons recording the stories of tribal elders. They described their connection to the land around Blackwater Lake and the sacred sites that had almost been destroyed by Thompson Development. "Eleanor's spirit chose wisely," Elder Joseph Whitefeather told her. "You have a good heart that sees truth." Meanwhile, Jack faced difficult days at home. His father refused to speak to him after the town meeting. Jack moved out of the family mansion and into a small house near the river. One rainy Tuesday, Jack's sister Emma visited him. "Dad's lawyer says he might face criminal charges for the forged permits," Emma said, sitting at Jack's kitchen table. Jack poured them both coffee. "I know. I've been cooperating with the investigation." "Mom is upset with you," Emma said, "but I'm proud of what you did." Jack smiled sadly. "Thanks, Em. That means a lot." Jack hired a new legal team for Thompson Development. He spent long hours reviewing every project the company had ever undertaken, looking for other ethical problems. "We need to rebuild this company the right way," he told his new team. "No shortcuts, no gray areas." The company's reputation suffered, but Jack was determined to save what could be saved. Hannah and Jack ran into each other occasionally at the Maple Springs Diner. Their conversations were awkward at first. "How are your classes going?" Jack asked during one such meeting. "Good," Hannah replied, stirring her coffee. "I'm learning so much about the area's history." "I saw you with the tribal representatives yesterday," Jack said. "They seem to have adopted you." Hannah smiled. "They've been incredibly kind. They're helping me understand Eleanor's story better." As weeks passed, their conversations became easier. They discovered they could talk about community issues without the pressure of their broken engagement hanging over them. Sheriff Wilson often watched their interactions from his regular corner table. He had become something of a mentor to both of them during this difficult time. One afternoon, he invited Hannah to join him for coffee. "You doing okay, kid?" he asked. Hannah nodded. "Better than I expected, actually. I feel like I'm finding myself." The sheriff smiled. "Some people go their whole lives without the courage to question the path they're on." "What about Jack?" Hannah asked. "Do you talk to him too?" "Sure do," Sheriff Wilson replied. "He's growing up fast these days. His father raised him to take over the family business, but not to ask too many questions. He's asking those questions now." Hannah looked out the window at the fall leaves swirling in the wind. "Do you think we made a mistake, Jack and I?" Sheriff Wilson considered this. "I think you both needed space to become who you're meant to be. Whether that leads you back to each other or not, only time will tell." Hannah thought about this as she walked home. The old Hannah would have done anything to avoid conflict, including marrying Jack despite her doubts. The new Hannah was learning to stand firmly in her truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Jack was changing too. The ambitious businessman who never questioned his father's methods was becoming someone more thoughtful, more willing to challenge the status quo. That night, Hannah wrote in her diary, "Eleanor showed me a different path when I needed it most. I don't know where it leads, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of the journey." As autumn leaves covered the ground in Willow Creek, Hannah stood by the old cabin near Blackwater Lake. Workers were carefully reinforcing the structure, which had been declared a historical site. "It's amazing to see how much has changed in just a few months," Hannah said to Sarah Whitefeather, who stood beside her. "Thanks to you," Sarah replied. "If you hadn't found these documents, my people would have lost this sacred land forever." Hannah shook her head. "It wasn't really me. It was Eleanor." The cabin had been transformed. Display cases now protected Thomas Walker's research papers and Eleanor's artifacts. A small plaque told the story of Eleanor Green and her brave attempt to protect the native lands. "The cleansing ceremony will begin at sunset," Sarah said. "The elders are preparing now." Hannah looked nervous. "I've never been part of anything like this before." "Don't worry," Sarah smiled. "They want to thank you for completing what Eleanor started." By late afternoon, people began gathering at Blackwater Lake. Members of the tribe wore traditional clothing. Many townspeople from Willow Creek came too, including Sheriff Wilson, Hannah's parents, and even Jack. Hannah approached Jack hesitantly. "I'm glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it," Jack said. "This is important for everyone." As the sun began to set, Elder Joseph Whitefeather lit a small fire and invited everyone to form a circle. "Today we heal old wounds," he announced. "The spirit of Eleanor Green can finally rest, knowing the truth has been revealed." The elder turned to Hannah. "Come forward, daughter." Hannah stepped into the circle, her heart pounding. "Eleanor chose you to be her voice," Elder Joseph said. "Today, we cleanse the pain of the past and honor your courage." The ceremony involved burning sacred herbs and prayers in the tribe's ancient language. When it was Hannah's turn, she placed Eleanor's wedding ring in a small clay bowl. "I return this to the earth," she said softly. "May Eleanor find peace." After the ceremony, people gathered for a community meal. Sheriff Wilson found Hannah sitting alone by the lake. "Quite a journey you've been on," he said, sitting beside her. Hannah nodded. I still can't believe all this happened because of a dream. Sometimes the most important messages come in unusual ways, Sheriff Wilson replied. The question is whether we're brave enough to listen. Across the gathering, Jack was speaking with William Thompson, who had finally agreed to attend the event. Their conversation looked tense, but important. Later that evening, William Thompson approached the tribal elders. His face showed the strain of recent months. "I want to apologize," he said formally. "My company was wrong. I was wrong." Elder Joseph nodded slowly. "Acknowledgement is the first step toward healing." William continued, "Thompson Development has established a scholarship fund for young people from your tribe to study environmental law and business ethics." "That is a good beginning," Elder Joseph replied. Hannah watched this exchange with mixed emotions. William had faced legal consequences for the forged permits, but his public apology seemed genuine. Jack joined her as people began to leave. "My father's company has hired several tribal members as consultants for future projects," he said. "It's not enough, but it's a start." Hannah smiled. "You've changed him." "We've all changed," Jack replied. As they walked back toward the parking area, Hannah's parents joined them. "We're proud of you," Richard said, hugging his daughter. "What you did took real courage." Linda wiped away a tear. "Though maybe next time you could just tell us before disappearing." Hannah laughed. "I promise." The following weekend, children from town visited the Miller farm to see Cinnamon. They gathered around as Hannah told a simplified version of her adventure. "Did the ghost really talk to you?" a young boy asked. Hannah smiled. "Not exactly. It was more like she showed me what I needed to find." "Is your horse magic?" a little girl asked, petting Cinnamon's nose. "Cinnamon is very special," Hannah replied. "She helped solve a mystery that was over 100 years old." As the children petted the horse, Sheriff Wilson observed from the fence. "You've become quite the local legend," he said to Hannah. Hannah shook her head. "I'm just glad something good came from all this. The land is protected, and people are learning the true history of this place." "And what about you and Jack?" Sheriff Wilson asked carefully. Hannah looked across the field where Jack was showing some children how to feed carrots to Cinnamon. "We're finding our way," she said, "both as individuals and maybe, someday, together again." 1 year passed since Hannah's wedding day. The leaves in Willow Creek had changed colors and fallen. Snow had covered the ground and melted away, and spring flowers had bloomed and faded. Now summer had returned again. The disputed land near Blackwater Lake looked different now. Instead of construction equipment for a resort, there were small wooden signs marking the sacred sites. A path led visitors through the area, with plaques explaining the history of the land and the people who had lived there for generations. In town, a small museum had opened in what used to be an empty storefront. The Eleanor Green Historical Center displayed photographs, documents, and artifacts telling the true story of Willow Creek's past. Hannah stood in the museum, arranging a new display. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat braid as she carefully placed Eleanor's wedding ring in a glass case. "That looks perfect," said Sarah Whitefeather, who helped run the museum. "The school groups coming tomorrow will love seeing it." "I hope so," Hannah replied. "It's important for children to learn the real history of this place." Hannah now lived in a small cottage at the edge of her parents' property. She had filled it with books and colorful rugs. Her window overlooked the apple orchard where she had grown up. That evening, Hannah sat on her porch working on her laptop. She was writing a book about Eleanor Green and the connections between past and present in Willow Creek. A car pulled into her driveway. Jack stepped out, carrying a folder. "Sorry to stop by unannounced," he said, walking up to the porch. "I found some old photographs of Blackwater Lake in my grandfather's study. I thought you might want them for your book." "Thank you," Hannah said, taking the folder. "These will be really helpful." Jack stood awkwardly for a moment. "How's the writing going?" "Good days and bad days," Hannah smiled. "Today was a good one." Over the past year, Jack had transformed Thompson Development. The company now focused on renovating old buildings in town rather than developing new land. Their first project had been turning the abandoned mill into affordable apartments. "Dad still thinks I'm crazy," Jack said as they looked through the photographs together. "But the company is doing well, and I can sleep at night knowing we're not hurting anyone." Hannah nodded. That's what matters. They had become cautious friends over the months. Their shared experience had created a bond, but both were careful not to rush back into their former relationship. The next morning, Hannah woke early. It was exactly 1 year since she had fled her wedding. She decided to visit the cabin alone. The path to Blackwater Lake was easier to travel now. Volunteers had cleared it and added small wooden bridges over the streams. Hannah walked slowly, enjoying the summer morning. At the cabin, she laid a bouquet of wildflowers by the doorway. "Thank you, Eleanor," she whispered, "for showing me a different path." Inside, the cabin had been preserved just as it was, though cleaner and with the roof repaired. Hannah sat on the old chair where she had spent days reading Thomas Walker's research. As she was preparing to leave, she heard footsteps outside. Jack appeared in the doorway. "I thought I might find you here today," he said. Hannah smiled. "Great minds think alike, I guess." "It's been exactly 1 year," Jack said, stepping inside. "A lot has changed," Hannah replied. "For the better, I think," Jack said. "Though not in the way either of us expected." They walked back to town together, talking easily about the museum, Hannah's book, and Jack's new projects. Neither mentioned getting back together, but there was no tension between them anymore. As they passed the diner, Sheriff Wilson waved to them from his usual corner table. They joined him for coffee. "You two look well," the sheriff said, closing his notebook. "We're getting there," Hannah replied. "Some things don't work out the way we plan," Sheriff Wilson said, looking at them both. "Sometimes they work out better." Later that day, Hannah stood by her cottage window, watching the sunset over the orchard. On her desk was her open laptop with the final paragraph of her book. Eleanor Green's story could have been forgotten forever. Instead, it changed the course of many lives in Willow Creek. It taught us that the past is never truly gone, and that sometimes we need to step off the expected path to find where we truly belong. She closed the laptop and smiled. Whatever the future held, she was ready for it.